Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to our webinar, Building Customer Value from Theory to Practice. I'm Abby Lundberg, Editor-in-Chief at MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be moderating the event. The advantages of being customer-focused are well known, yet many companies still struggle to put customers at the center of their strategies. Customer portfolio management provides a framework for achieving that customer centricity. In their new book, Customer Portfolio Management, Creating Value with a Large Leaky Bucket of Customers, which I love the name of, Fred Selnes and Michael Johnson expand on this framework. Together, they'll walk us through their model, offering a practical approach for centering customers in business strategy. They'll explain how to balance customer acquisition versus retention and how to develop meaningful customer analytics with AI. Michael and Fred have written about this for MIT Sloan Management Review. You'll find their original article in the handouts section for download, and we'll also post the link to that and to an excerpt of their new book in the chat. Their book launched just last week. Fred Selnes is a professor of marketing at BI Norwegian Business School. Michael Johnson is the marketing department chair at the Wisconsin School of Business, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Dean Emeritus at Cornell University. Welcome, Michael and Fred.
Good morning, Abby.
Good morning.
And good morning to everybody out there. Fred and I are going to tag team this and tell you a bit about both what we've been studying really for the past 20 years and what we've been learning lately about customer portfolio management, because it's very much a sort of a changing landscape. So I'm going to walk you through the framework that we use in the agenda. We'll do an overview of the CPM framework. We'll cover some lessons learned, and we'll sort of hopefully make sure you understand what we mean by the value of a large leaky bucket. But to understand the metaphor, you have to sort of understand what came before it. And what came before it was the notion of a watertight bucket. Back in the 1990s, when researchers like Fred and I and a lot of other people in the marketing and marketing science area started looking at the connections between customer satisfaction, loyalty, and profitability, we started seeing some very strong connections. And that is when people started to realize what sort of became known as the loyalty effect, which was it's much more expensive to replace a current customer with a new customer. So the idea is you didn't want leaks in your bucket. You wanted a fairly watertight bucket. The problem is sometimes that metaphor got taken too far. And people stopped pouring water in the bucket. They stopped putting new customers into their portfolio. And they tried to plug maybe all the leaks they could. And the key to the leaky bucket phenomena is which leaks are you going to plug? Which customers do you want to retain in your portfolio while you're always adding new customers to the portfolio? Abby asked us a good question as we were getting ready for the webinar, and that is, what are some of the things we've learned, more recently as we were writing the book? One of the things we learned is of the different strategies you could use to manage your portfolio. Defense is the best offense. So I'll get into a little bit more of that lesson here in a few minutes. Fred's then going to cover a couple of lessons. One is how all the activities that ultimately impact customers are part of the process. Customer centricity is affected by all your marketing related activities. And he's going to share a brief case study on a company called Sector Alarm, which is a good example. We're also going to talk a bit about AI. In the book, we talk about the need in the concept of CPM analytics, customer portfolio management analytics, how you need very good measures, you need predictive modeling, but you also need good theory. So Fred will elaborate on that in a little bit. And then we'll add with some action steps under sort of the bottom line value of a large leaky bucket. So portfolio management, if you think about it, it's really a framework for managing cash flows. And this is something that approaches to CLV at the time really weren't looking at. They were looking at the value of individual customers. Where we started looking at a little bit broader business question, which is how do customers contribute to the cash flows of a company over not just weeks or months, but years? And that ties in very much with the importance of delivering high customer satisfaction and having customer loyalty. So a lot of CLV principles are still operating here, but it's really how you manage projected cash flows over a long period of time. And that led us to a different way to study this as well, which I'll get to in just a second when we get into the framework. But it includes a portfolio of both weak and strong customer relationships. So what we started to realize is that the weaker relationships in your portfolio also have an opportunity to provide tremendous value. So you can't just focus on the strongest relationships. Strong relationships are definitely more profitable. The partners or friends in your portfolio are more profitable than your acquaintances. But there's only so many of them. And one of the concepts we repeat time and again in the book is loyalty is fleeting. Loyal customers don't last forever. While CPM builds upon approaches to customer centricity and customer lifetime value, it recognizes the value that you still need some leaks in the bucket. You still need some of those customers who may be not the kind of customers who will stay with you long term. So the framework itself has three major components, but it really starts with relationship segmentation. If you think of traditional segmentation, the way it's still taught in most intro to marketing courses in most business school, it starts with needs-based segmentation. Some customers want a thicker soup, customers want a friendlier bank, but it really should start with what's the strength of the relationship between you and your customer. And we started to realize that there's a very, very robust segmentation scheme out there. You may have six, Delta Airlines may have 5 or 6 layers in its loyalty program. And Marriott Hotels may have the same number in their loyalty program. But when you get right down to it, there's 3 different strengths in the relationships you find in your customers. And we find this to be very, very robust. It really comes from B2B marketing, but applies as well to B2C marketing. And that's this notion of acquaintances, friends, and partners. Now, you can't ignore the strangers, which I'll get to in a minute, because that's where your future customers are going to come from. But this turned out to be such a complex problem when we started looking at it that we really needed to look at the future cash flows in a different way. And that's where we came up with a model called the Customer Portfolio Lifetime Value Model. We're only going to show you the model in very general terms here, but we are going to, I'm going to explain real quickly why it's important. There's so many variables, we had to track them almost like a pro forma financial model in terms of what these different customer segments would add over time. And I'm going to show you one at least simulation result of that later on in the presentation. We also had to simplify what were the variety of management decisions that were involved. So in our discussions and applications with companies of portfolio management, we identified 4 key decisions that the management needs to make. How many resources do you put into acquiring customers? How much do you put into plugging holes in the bucket, the relationship defense? Once you have those customers in your system, in your portfolio, how do you leverage, cross-sell, bundle products and services for them? And how do you convert at least some of those customers to stronger, more profitable relationships? But the key, the starting point in the whole framework is the typology of the different relationships. And again, those of you on the presentation today who are coming from B2B companies, you will really identify fairly quickly with some of these classifications, because there's some customers that on the far right there that are truly partners in your system. You work very closely with them, you customize offerings. There's other customers that are friends. They order in volume, they order regularly, they see some differential value. But there may be other customers that are much more transactional, your acquaintances. They're going to come and go. And so instead of just one level of differentiation, if you think of Michael Porter's, classic strategies, in marketing, we've been talking about differentiation for a long time, and there's different levels of differentiation. And it goes from the more transactional to the more embedded in systems. There are these same classifications apply to B2C companies. If you think about companies like Amazon and Apple, some of us are very embedded in their systems, which lowers the marketing cost, makes it very easy to cross-sell, makes it difficult to extract yourself, from some of those systems. Now, you can't forget strangers. Strangers are where the customers come from in the first place as you grow a portfolio, and that would also include estranged customers in the systems, or customers that might leave, and then you want to invite them back in. If you haven't bought anything off of Amazon in a while, I'm sure you're getting emails from them trying to encourage you to get back into their system. So that is sort of where it starts with that typology. But then to really start to understand the dynamics of portfolio management, we started looking at a customer portfolio lifetime value model. And that model, this is just an equation to hopefully make it as simple as possible, but looks at cash flows over time. A lot of the details are back in our original Journal of Marketing article. But you got to look at expected customers over time and the cash flow from those customers. They're going to be impacted by the number of customers you add, the number of loyal customers you create, the cross-selling or volume increases from the customers that are in the portfolio, and the cost structure. And again, this is a key thing that makes the whole approach, customer portfolio management, different. Is that we realize that you can really spread costs a much larger customer base if you have both stronger and weaker customers in your portfolio. But let me talk for a minute about some of these different strategies. As I mentioned, the different strategies, so we'll focus on three of them here. But in our modeling, our more recent modeling that we cover in the book, we talked about three strategies as opposed to a sort of what we think of as a parity strategy, competitive parity, where everybody's simply following the same strategy. We call it the follower strategy. So as we model companies that are literally investing the same in customer acquisition, customer defense, customer switching, cross-selling activity, as we look at the costs and the benefits of that, everybody's sort of in an equilibrium. We then looked at three different strategies. What if you focus primarily on just adding new customers to the bucket? So we looked at a company that may invest 10% more than competitors in activities to attract or quote unquote steal customers from the competitors. Now, you're not necessarily plugging holes in the bucket here. So this is something you're not doing with this strategy. A defense strategy focuses on plugging holes, some holes in the bucket, to be able to keep more and more customers in the portfolio. Now, what this does is it actually does a few things. It allows the portfolio to grow more naturally, and it adds more high-value customers into the portfolio as well. The conversion strategy, if all I'm focusing on is taking some of my friends and making them partners, or some of my acquaintances and making them friends, I'm really focused just on the profit per customer, not so much the size of the portfolio. So if we run those simulations and see sort of how those different strategies impact returns, the overall value of the portfolio over time, we get some interesting results. We find that if we first of all, just because these are all in sort of monetary values, we just benchmark the follower strategy at a baseline of 100% and look at how the other strategies add value from there. The acquisition strategy, where I'm only pouring water in the bucket, adds about 14% to the baseline in terms of customer portfolio lifetime value, because there's still a lot of leaks in the bucket. If I go all the way to the right to the conversion strategy, I'm not pouring a lot more bucket than competitors in the bucket, but I'm focusing more on making some of them friends and partners. And that gives me a little bit more of a boost. I get a 27% boost over the baseline. But if I do a defensive strategy where I'm trying to retain my partners, friends, and some of my acquaintances, I'm literally doing continuous improvement and doing innovation on a regular basis for my portfolio. I get over a 50% return in my customer portfolio over time. Now, this strategy and this finding we liked and we included in the book because it's very consistent with a growing literature in the customer satisfaction area that shows very strong links between customer satisfaction, which is key to a defensive strategy, and returns, whether it's increasing your profit per customer, your market share, or your stock price. So at that point, Fred, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So the question here is, what firm activities and parts of the value chain will affect CPLV? And we put up here the equation again, and I want you to pay attention to a few things. One is that we are looking at expected cash flow, which is into the future over n periods of time. So it's the value is in the future, which is how we address it. The second is that it's across segments. And this is important because segments may be very different in terms of what is the best strategy. In one segment, it could be the best strategy is to acquire more customers. In another segment, it can be to increase loyalty and so forth. And that is at the over level, but it can also be more detailed differences across segments. But we think it's very important to build up your strategy across segments. And the third thing, if you look at the variables below here, new customers, etc., and if you think about who in an organization or what market activities are connected with new customers, more loyal customers, and so forth, what you immediately see is that in an organization, it's not only one department, one function that is responsible for acquiring new customers. There's multiple functions and activities in an organization related to new customers, and the same with all the other ones. So this makes it a bit more complicated because in order to develop a good strategy for increasing CPLV, you need to sort of coordinate all the types of activities needed to build the value. And that makes CPLV and the customer portfolio management a strategic issue and should not be an issue or a concern of a department like the marketing department or the marketing function. This is a top level concern. It's the CEO or the board which should be concerned about this and have to address this issue. So if you think about this, we can break down all the activities a company is doing, market-related activities. It can be a digital one-to-one activity, for example, where you can have a series of customer programs, for example, programs addressing reduced churn. So you have some programs in operation for doing that. You can also have a sales force working with retention. They are visiting customers and trying to sort of secure the relationship. You can have a customer loyalty program where you have a reward set up, which is stimulating customers to stay with the company. Customer service, where customers call in, plays a crucial role because if their service requests are not handled properly, the customers are likely to get dissatisfied and so forth. So what you see here is that all the market-related activities affect the future value of the portfolio. Now, the point here is that these activities, all of them can have an effect, but in many organizations, we see that this is not coordinated. So what digital one-to-one is doing is not coordinated with the customer loyalty program or the customer service. So in a way, we can say that the right hand is not knowing what the left hand is doing. And therefore, companies may be doing too much of certain activities and too little of other activities, simply because they're not coordinated and don't know what is really going on. So what is needed is a sort of shared understanding of how CPLV is affected by all these activities in all, and then also how that can be used to affect these activities in a coordinated way. The way to think about this is that once you get the CPLV insight, when you know what the role of the different activities are, you are also likely to get some new insight about what could be a good thing to do in order to increase parameters in the CPLV, either to increase expected number of customers and so forth. So with the CPLV insight as a sort of process, is the analytical process, you gain new insight, and with new insight you gain new ideas, you get new ideas. And then with new ideas, the thing is that you start testing for effects on CPLV. So if we do things in a different way, what will then happen? And then when things are working, then of course you can redesign your market activity and achieve higher CPLV. Notice that this is a continuous process. It's a constant struggle, as we say down here. It's not a checklist. You're never done with CPLV management or things like this. It has to be a continuous innovation process. So to give you a little example of how we can think about this, we have selected to tell you the story about Sector Alarm. It is one of Europe's leading safety providers. And some years ago, they faced a significant threat to their customer portfolio. So what they discovered was an unexpected spike in customer defections. And the thing was that these alarms started to send out false alarms due to battery issues. So it's important here that to understand where this company was coming from. They had been very successful with customer acquisition. They were a sales organization, very good at getting new customers. All their thinking was about getting new customers. The customer service, when you called customer service, they were trained how to sell you things. If you send them an email, they would immediately think sales. So what the research showed was that after a couple of years, and this is some years back where batteries were not that long-lived and so forth. So after 2 or 3 years with an alarm, the thing was that the alarm started to send false signals, and I said that there's alarm which was really false. And of course, this was very frustrating for the customers because they didn't know what was going on. So they called customer service, but customer service, they were trained to sell and not to respond to these types of requests. And there was no other place where they could place their concern. So what this led to was that after a lot of frustration, many customers decided that they will just drop Sector Alarm and go with a competitor. So once the sort of problem was discovered, it was quite easy to what to be done to make a predict on each customer what alarm they had, so they could figure out the lifetime of the battery, and a few weeks or months, a couple of months maybe, before the battery was critical. They sent an email, or sometimes they called and from customer service and say that, dear customer, we need to change your batteries. You can do it yourself. This is a package for it, or we can come and help you if you want to the assistance. It will be at no cost for you. And of course, most customers, they wanted the free service of changing batteries, because changing batteries can be a hassle in these types of things. So that led to customer service people visiting their customers, changed the batteries, and at the same time they could talk about other things with the alarm, and which very often led to an upgrading of the alarms, because maybe they had a dog they didn't think about, and so forth. So it went from losing customers to not only sort of fixing the problem with the defection, but also it also changed the revenues, because the customers started to buy more expensive models and so forth. So this was very important. They managed to change the cash flow, but it also had a huge impact on the organization, because they realized that their whole sales culture needed to be converted to a relationship building culture, and they had to work with hardware in different ways and so forth. So this is showing that in order to fix the CPLV, you really need an organization-wide approach, and that analytics is central in this process. So analytics, customer analytics or business analytics, is an essential part of CPLV. But this is also a complex task, because the effect of any market activity is affected by the effects of other market activities. And the effects vary across customer segments. And the effects are also sensitive to competition and market dynamics. So what you find one year may not be the same you will find next year, and so forth. So that is one reason it's complex. The other observation we have done is that the digitalization going on in organizations with new systems and data management has actually made things worse, because each activity now in the organization, like the digital one-to-one and so forth, they have very good data, very good analytics on their function, on their activities, and they are becoming very sophisticated and very sure about their bits, their little piece of the whole system. But it's also a situation where the silos have become more silos. So in order to work with this, you really need to work with how these systems are connected, and work with that. So although analytics is important in order to see how the whole systems, all the systems, databases and so forth should be connected, that is one part of it. The other is that you also need sound theory, because in order to interpret what's going on, you really need to understand customer behavior. You need to understand the customer behavior in different segments. And here is an illustration of theories developed in customer satisfaction, which is very useful and helpful in order to develop the right way to look at your data, and in order to really create meaningful analytics. And then, of course, with the tools we now have in machine learning, this process can be even more sophisticated. And there's a lot of very exciting things going on that end. So again, just a reminder that remember that you should really do your artificial intelligence and machine learning across segments because it may vary from segment to segment, and that it should be led by sound theory and a good understanding of what's going on.
All right, I'm gonna
I'll
take this one. Because this is one I've been, this goes back to my work with a lot of my Michigan colleagues, years ago. So there's a researcher by the name of Klaus Fernell, who's probably one of the best known guys in customer satisfaction. And, the research using the national indices in Norway, Sweden, the US, and elsewhere has shown for years these very, very positive impacts of increasing satisfaction. But at the end of the day, it's hard being customer-centric, and the benefits are downstream. So if your organization is consumed by short-term thinking, it's going to be hard to think that the investments you're making today are going to pay off in a year or 2 years or 5 years from now. So the benefits are downstream. Well, the capital investments and the strategies can turn on a dime. So that's one of the things that makes it difficult. It takes time to put the processes in place, the good analytics, good models, good theories. I mean, Amazon has been doing this for a while. They have something like 10,000 employees focused on machine learning and AI. But at the same time, as Fred touched on, they're applying very sound traditional marketing theories to that data, which is one of the reasons they've been so successful. But, there's some other just sort of traditional reasons as well. Inconsistent focus in a company is a common sort of cause over time of a lack of customer focus. Take the sector alarm example, quality problems. Well, they could have reacted in a very different way to those quality problems and not really taken a more sort of holistic cross-functional approach. Someone may lack ownership. I always love to go back to Peter Drucker's quote, which is as true today as it was, over 70 years ago, which is marketing is not just sales and advertising. Marketing is looking at the whole organization from the point of view of its end result, which is the customer. So that makes it very, very difficult. And again, it requires sensitive metrics. It requires the good analytics, and it requires good theories. So it's not an easy thing to do, but the companies have done it. Jeff Bezos said for years, we are a customer-obsessed company. And they haven't done too shabbily. So I think, Fred, you want me to take this one? You want me to sum it up?
Yes, please.
So let's get back to this metaphor of the large leaky bucket and why it's so valuable. Where we started doing research years ago and working with companies, putting satisfaction systems in place, showing their impact on profitability. But in the end, you have to think about what would you rather have? A small watertight bucket of just loyal customers, which is where a CPL, a sort of classical, customer lifetime value, if I just focused on my only high value customers, that's where I can end up. One of the case studies we mentioned in the book is LL Bean. When they started looking at the fact that a subset of their customers gave them most of their profits, they just started focusing on those subset of customers. They woke up 5 years later with a very small portfolio of customers that no one was coming in the front door. You still need new customers coming in the front door. Or would you like the large leaky bucket? At the end of the day, even the most loyal customer eventually leaves a portfolio. The most loyal flyers on Delta Airlines, the most loyal customers to a Hilton honors program or a Marriott Bonvoy program are going to stop traveling so much. So eventually, even a small watertight bucket, the water evaporates out of the top of the bucket. The value of the large leaky buckets comes from especially the weaker relationships. Even those that are leaky relationships, they, on the one hand, they allow you to spread your costs over a much larger base. They give you a larger scale of operation. They also provide a source of future loyal customers. Some of those leaky customers, those acquaintances, are going to become friends, and some of those friends are going to become partners. So, action items. I think, as Fred mentioned, get senior leadership involved. Get them on board. This is something that has to be driven by the top. Whenever we've had a successful application of this in business, it's because the senior leadership has gotten on board. It's not just a marketing activity. If you start anywhere, the best place to start is with a segmentation scheme. Who are your acquaintances, friends, and partners? In the book, we cover different approaches to that on how to segment customers, how to use data to do that. But in a lot of organizations, you're going to have a good sense of who are your partners, who are you working very closely with, and who are your more transactional customers. Once you have that segmentation scheme in place, start studying the cash flows. Start with simple CLV models, and then they can become more complicated over time, and start thinking about what market-related activities impact those cash flows and what insights that generates. But overall, you got to both focus on creating more loyal customers that are more profitable, but never stop bringing customers in the front door. Always be adding new customers to your portfolio. So, Abby, I think that brings us to the Q&A section.
Super. Really interesting, getting tons of great questions from the audience. And I wanted to start off with sort of the, you had touched on this before, and the question, have you seen some dissatisfaction among executives with the ability to connect the investments, specifically in customer experience management, to financial performance? So there's sort of been a little bit of a backlash, is what you've observed. So what's the main problem, and how does customer portfolio management avoid similar issues around that?
That's a great question. We're seeing this dissatisfaction. I was teaching a seminar last week where I brought up who's using net promoter scores, and I asked people how satisfied they were. Now, I think it's a measure that was well intended, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of traditional reasons why a customer experience approach, can fail, whether it's inconsistent focus or lack of ownership. But we've seen companies get away from strong metrics and what you could call the marketing science that we've learned over the last 20, 30 years. You think of something like a net promoter score that's become so popular. You're basically taking a single measure from a customer. You're arbitrarily deciding, who's a promoter and who's a detractor. You're throwing that information away by throwing them together. Oh, by the way, there's probably 30% measurement error in that measure, that single item measure. You're then subtracting those two measures and amplifying the error. So engineers talk all the time about signal to noise ratio. You have measures. A lot of companies gone to measures that are simple to use. Top box scores, another one of my least favorite ideas. Top box scores. Let's take the top 3 boxes on a 10-point scale and put them together. I'm sorry, but that's where all the information is. Who's a 7? Who's an 8? Who's a 9? Who's a 10 on a 10-point scale? So we've seen this proliferation of metrics, and then you're wondering, why are people becoming disenchanted with customer experience measurement? They're not seeing the relevance. They're not seeing the impact on financial returns. I mentioned our colleague Klaus Fernell and the ACSI. Interested readers might look at some of their press releases. But they have built a stock portfolio. I think this is some of the best evidence, Abby. They have built a stock portfolio over the last 20 years based on customer satisfaction scores. And that portfolio has categorically outperformed the S&P 500. It's done it in every year in which there wasn't market turbulence. And the cumulative returns are between 2 to 3 times what you would get from an S&P index. So there's literally over a dozen key financial performance metrics that we've seen when you have very good sensitive measures, when you have good theory, good causal models to put that in, when you know how A affects B, affects C, affects D, and you apply predictive modeling to it, machine learning tools to it, you're going to see strong connections, and then you're going to see the payoff. I don't know, Fred probably has an opinion on this as well.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I think customer experience management is doing exactly the thing that we talked about when you have all the market-related activities affecting CPLV. With customer experience management, you simply focus on just a couple of the factors of that will create new customers and retain customers. So, for example, you need not only to have control on the customer experience in the interaction, but you also need to have attractive products for the future, and you also need to have a strong, attractive brand around this. Just to say a few. So it is. I think part of the reason why we don't see so successful customer experience management in terms of financial outcome is that they taken out some very, very important elements of their analysis.
Yeah, it means literally, I think, that if you see a problem with the customer experience, you don't know what to tell all the different functions in the firm. You don't know how to translate that down all the way down into engineering or design characteristics of the product, into the service process, into the sales process, the supply chain. Whereas a lot of the work that was done literally 20 years ago was how to translate those things. There's a classic article some of us may remember called The House of Quality, where you had to know what was important to the customer, what was driving satisfaction, in order to translate it into the rest of the functions in the organization. And we just don't see that happening today, which is why you have disenchantment.
So we do have a few more questions around the sort of the metrics and the timing and how you get there. So Luis asks, what are the key metrics to determine the success of the implementation of CPLV, and what is the expected time frame to observe the initial effects on the ROI?
Fred, do you want to talk about analytics for a second? I have some ideas.
Yes, I think it's like this is like a continuous process. When you start analyzing, you will get some new insight. Some companies, like the sector alarm, it didn't take long before we found the problem, and it didn't take long to fix it. So sometimes this can go very quickly. Other times it's more complicated. There are other things. But I think the main point is that you shouldn't really think of this as something to fix. It's more like a process, like a journey, where you constantly working with innovation based on good insight in what drives the value of your customers.
Yeah, there's another case study, I think, also in the book that helps drive this point home. And it's a home building company. And it points to the value of where you start and then sort of how the process unfolds. But you start with the segmentation into acquaintances, friends, and partners. And when it did that, long story short, they found huge differences across their retail outlets. Same marketing programs, same products, same service system, but they found huge differences in the percentage of friends and partners, which were much more valuable than acquaintances. They even found something interesting. They found high volume acquaintances, which can turn on a dime and become strangers again, become estranged. So they got a ton of value just by that first important step, which is segmenting the customers based on relationship strength. Then they started building the systems that Fred talked about. They kept at it in a continuous process of building better metrics, putting those metrics into better models, so they knew what continuous improvements to work on.
So one more question on timing before we move on to some of the organizational issues. From Kumar asks, how much time would it typically take to convert strangers to partners, and what are some strategies to speed that up? A long question.
Oh gosh, that's like the million-dollar question, right? I think there are some industries where it can happen quicker than others where it just is simply going to take time. You think about the homework you do when whether you inherit money or you've been, all of a sudden you decide you need a wealth manager and you need something more than just a bank account, right? And you start studying much more closely who you're going to partner with from an investment and wealth management standpoint. But you can get people from going from acquaintances to strangers all the way to partners, once they do their research and make that decision and get feedback and do their research. In other cases, it can grow slowly over time. I know I have friends in the parts business in the Detroit area that he's constantly trying to work on. He has a large stable of friends, people who buy regularly from him over time, the Toyotas of the world, where he may have a partnership with Ford or General Motors, and he's trying to create more of a partnership, and it can take multiple years. So I don't think there's a single answer to that. You have to look at, Fred mentioned earlier, the competition, the context is going to be very important to that process. The key is to do it deliberately. Once you have good metrics in place, you can start to see the sensitivities of these different segments to different marketing activities. You can see how sensitive they are to things like increasing their retention or their price premiums with customer satisfaction. Then you can start focusing on that. But you're literally asking the question of what are the sensitivities? How quickly do they work? You need good metrics.
And we do have a couple of questions that I may come back to if we have time around different firm types and how that works. But I did want to get in some of the organizational questions. So Gautam asks, what steps can marketing departments who are custodians of consumer brands, what steps can they take to ensure that the digital product teams or IT and business-facing team work together toward the same consistent approach for measuring and improving CPLV?
Well, I can start because I think this is a situation I met several times, and I think the first step you can do is to organize the customer data you have, because in most companies they have very good databases for product and accounting and things like that, but many companies, they simply lack keeping track of new customers, retained customers, converted customers, or whatever. So, for example, if you have a marketing campaign where the objective is to get new customers, if you don't have a tracking system, which really counts how many customers did you get or do you get on a regular basis, you can't really say if the marketing campaign was successful unless you have something to measure it against. And I think the marketing department can take the lead and say that, well, we don't necessarily own all the customers, but we will definitely have our role is to know about all the customers we have and what's happening in the portfolio. I think that is, at least when I meet some of the companies, I think that is something that people think makes sense, in order just to have that information, and then you can drive some simple analytics. And then when you have that, you can go to the other departments and say, okay, look, I see what we have found, and how can we work on this? But you need some facts early on. And don't leave this to the IT department. It's because the IT department will tell you, well, we have these systems, this wonderful system, we have all the things you need, and so forth. But they don't. The IT people and the IT department can be one of the problems in terms of getting things done in the right way, unfortunately.
So a related question here is from Jordan, which was, thinking about the other side of it, is if you're one of the folks who are really responsible for the customer acquisition strategy, but that's not coordinated across departments, how do you get senior leadership to get involved in coordinating that sort of continuous leverage of CPLV insight?
Well, it's that's I mean, you have to rely on the rationality that where you find things, you have good statistics, you have good knowledge, so it's reliable measures, everything is sound. Then it's about informing about the situation and also some of the challenges, and I think like the tradition of developing some business case or scenarios and what if type of things to create awareness, but you can't start without. And if you have a top management which is not interested, well, then you're not going to succeed, unfortunately. That's
yeah. Look at some of the companies, what some of the CEOs are doing. I mentioned sort of hotels enough. Having spent 10 years at the hotel school at Cornell, I sort of, it's one of my favorite examples. And I'm going to borrow a concept because it goes back to your question about brands, Abby, and how they fit into this, the brand management part of this. But this is an idea that Fred builds into his textbooks. Where is marketing going, as a function? It can't just be needs-based segmentation. Needs-based segmentation is still really important. But it needs to come underneath this notion of what's my strength of relationship with this customer. That's the first thing they need to start with and understand. And where it's going, and Fred talks about in this book, we mention it in our book, is what CEOs need to do at that high level is start mapping all of my brands into those relationships. You can think of it as a matrix approach. Where I'm literally saying I've got my potential customers, my strangers, my acquaintances, my friends and partners. Then I got my entire Marriott portfolio of hotels, where which of those hotels apply to which customers now. If I want to convert them, those may be ways, marketing some of those different brands, getting customers to experience that may get them be a way of moving along that continuum. But it's really more of a mapping process. And that starts bringing the whole organization more into the thought process.
Great. We have a few questions around AI. They're not specifically around the analytics piece, but I will ask them anyway. Adnan was asking, how will agentic AI adoption impact customer portfolio management strategy, especially when we talk about CPLV?
Tell you my frustration right now. We have an outstanding group of young scholars all working on Gen AI sort of technology right now, and it's being used. Our instructors are using it in real time in the classroom to better design websites and advertisements and things like that. But where I think it's really going to have the impact is when we flip the switch. Some researchers are projecting in the not too distant future, 70% of AI applications in marketing will be predictive AI. So you think about the weeks and months that we used to spend when Fred and I were younger, building databases and running predictive models. It's the same type of models you want to run, but you're going to be able to hit a button on your computer and rerun the model. So to me, that's going to be the game changer. A lot of our marketing students, they're going to need to know Gen AI very well. They need to know it now for the jobs they're taking. But I think, the real change in marketing when we talk about CPLV is going to be the predictive AI.
Oh, so taking that a step further, the use of AI, Ghislaine asks, can you share any examples where AI or machine learning has been successfully used to automate the relationship segmentation in the CPM model?
Yeah, I have an example where so one approach And it's not a very sophisticated machine learning model, just to say that. But we started for the company, we started with a survey just to figure out the segments for this company. So because the problem with this secondary data is that you don't know the thinking behind the data. So that's why we started with the survey. So we identified four segments based on psychometrics. Then we connected that information to all the data in the data set, because we know there were, so for a few customers we knew their thinking. We connected that to their behavior, and then we populate the model simply by because the model was able to but based on secondary data, it was able to say, okay, you're in segment A, you're in segment B, segment, and so forth. So the machine started then to predict without knowing the psychology, just knowing their behavior. They could then put customers in the appropriate need-based segments without having asked them any question. And this has been built into a continuous process where the CRM system is borrowing from this model and adjusting emails and other information based on that. Next level would be then to take the responses based on the emails you send and so forth, and improve that also with machine learning, so that you can make better emails and content in that information. So that is probably where we're heading, is that we, as we go, we can train models, okay, to adjust communication to in a CRM system, for example.
So I think we have time for one more question. And that's why I said I would get back to the sort of segmentation question. Gail would like to know, might this approach change depending on the stage or maturity of a company? For example, would a startup or disruptor start with one approach and evolve over time as the customer base grows? Would a well-established leading player still focus depending on the competitive environment?
Oh, I think definitely. I think, it's all about, balance. It's not, it's what you will want to avoid is being myopic. There are people out there saying it's only defense. It's only customer satisfaction. There's people out there saying it's only about volume. And clearly those strategies may apply at different parts of a product or service life cycle, but it's about the balance. And that balance can change over time. So early on, yes, you need to start pouring a lot of water in the bucket to get a takeoff point, in sales. But at the same time, you can't do that even early in a startup, being divorced from what's going on in the minds of the customers and that relationship. The beauty about startups, the question comes from someone from a startup, the beauty of startups is they tend to start out pretty close to their customers. Yep. So they can probably focus on volume while they're in constant contact with those customers.
Great. And then just a quick one to wrap up. We're getting a lot of questions for the name of the customer satisfaction stock index that you mentioned.
Okay. You should go to, it's one word, theacsi.org. THEACSI, the American Customer Satisfaction Index. It's data that a lot of us in the community have used. Fred knows Klaus Fornell very, very well, but it was a startup project at the University of Michigan over 30 years ago, and the beauty of it is now we have 30 years worth of time series to be able to study, and this is why we're seeing, and that goes back to the frustrations. You got to get better metrics, and the ACSI is a benchmark for how to measure customer satisfaction.
Fantastic. Well, Michael and Fred, thank you so much for a really interesting presentation, a lot of great information, and thank you to the audience for your great questions. Sorry we didn't get to more of them, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Fred and Michael.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby.